All right. So, hello and welcome back. So, as you can clearly see, I have done a lot of work on this whole screen majigger. So, hope you guys like that. Otherwise, we're going to take a look at Retreat from Moscow 1812. The video is 28 minutes long. So, this video with me reacting to it is probably over an hour and 10 minutes or something. I would very much appreciate it if you give me a like and a subscribe if you're enjoying this content, because I probably won't ask for it during the hour and 10 minutes I'm going to be talking. Either way, there's that. The original video's in the description. Go check that out. Also, you'll see above me there is Patreon supporters now. I thought I would do something with the dead space, so there you go. The highest ranking Patreon supporters, basically whoever's the highest ones, will be displayed there. So there we go. If you'd like to become Patreon, it's down in the description. Otherwise, we're about to pick up where we left off from Napoleon, where he beat the Russians technically at Borodino. So now we're about to see him occupying Moscow and the Great Fire that's about to happen from there. So let's continue. Peace lies in Moscow, Napoleon, September 8th, 1812, and how wrong he was.
Russia, 1812. Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen. But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach. Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history. The 15th of September, 1812. 83 days after invading Russia, a week after his costly victory at Borodino, Napoleon entered Moscow.
Think about that. 83 days. Not even 3 months after he invaded Russia, he's in Moscow. Puts the German army to shame.
He expected to be greeted by dignitaries, formally offering the city's surrender. Instead, he discovered that 90% of Moscow's inhabitants had fled. A fire had started the previous night and was blamed on drunken soldiers. But over the next 48 hours, fires continued to break out across Moscow until most of the city was ablaze. Count Fyodor Rostopchin, the city's governor, had ordered that Moscow be destroyed rather than allowed to fall into enemy hands.
Think about that. The Russians are willing to destroy one of their own cities rather than having it fall in enemy hands. That goes to their sheer determination to win this war. Also, fire. This is something probably not talked about, but the best bet you have with a fire is a bucket and some dudes. At this point in time, there is no fire trucks really. Bucket brigades is what they were called. So basically, dudes would just keep running water to throw in onto a fire. Now you can imagine that's not very effective with a city that's basically wood. It's going to go out of control very fast. They did make some upgrades in the fire brigade. Again, I'm not familiar with this subject really much at all, but you could have carts of water. I don't believe steam pumps were available at this time. Certainly not in Moscow at this time, but they might have been started to be phased in on a cart where they could spray water. But again, they still had to be refilled by buckets. So there was no fire hydrants and stuff like that. So a fire is really, really devastating during this time period, all the way till we actually start getting really decent fire trucks. And that's really in the 1900s when that starts happening.
And now fires were being started deliberately by Russian criminals, freed from jail and acting on police orders. French soldiers rounded up and shot any they could catch. But the inferno was impossible to contain. In 4 days, 2/3 of Moscow was destroyed. With the fires finally under control, Napoleon's soldiers turned their attention to systematically looting the ruined city.
So two-thirds of the city is destroyed. That would be like two-thirds of New York City or um, Pennsylvania. I'm trying to remember. Can't remember, but like two-thirds of New York just burnt to the ground. Absolutely. I mean, this is still going to be devastating on the Russian people and economy. I am positive that that is happening. But they determined that this is better than having it fall into the French hands. And it's going to be actually a pretty effective strategy considering Napoleon's going to have to abandon the city because there's no food. Everything's been burned. Also, the looting. That's per standard usual of this time. There's nothing that says looting is not. It's just a standard. So when they said they looted everything, oh well. I mean, this is what happens.
While from his new quarters in the Kremlin, Napoleon sent a letter to Emperor Alexander in St. Petersburg, inviting him to make peace and end the war.
Now you're seeing these days tick, okay? So now we've gone from September into now October. We've gone from like the middle of September to late to October, beginning of October, just for the messenger to arrive with Alexander. Now, you're going to see Russian winter is coming, and it is going to be coming fast. He doesn't have any supplies. He doesn't have any shelter. He needs to do something. He's betting on the Russians surrendering, and this is this is something that's not going to happen. So he's going to have to get the hell out of there unless, I mean, he doesn't have a choice. He'll either freeze to death or he has to leave if the Russians don't surrender.
He received no reply. Napoleon waited, confident that Alexander would eventually negotiate. But as the days passed, he grew increasingly uneasy. Cossack raids were disrupting his vital communications with Paris, as well as the arrival of supplies, while the steady attrition of French forces and Russian reinforcements meant Napoleon was outnumbered for the first time in the campaign. Rumours also reached him that his reluctant allies, Prussia and Austria, were in secret talks with his enemies. Napoleon had proposed that the army winter in Moscow, but that now looked too dangerous. Reluctantly, he accepted that the army would have to move back to Smolensk to find safe winter quarters.
Okay, so let's take a look at this. The reason that that is being suggested, Napoleon suggests he can winter in Moscow, is basically he doesn't want to move. It's October. You do not have a lot of time before the Russian winter is already here / coming before it gets real bad. Two-thirds of the city have been burned. He is outnumbered by Kuzetsov. Kutuzov, oh my god, the Russian marshal. He can attack Moscow at any time, and his supplies are always good because he's in his own homeland. I won't say they're good. I'll say he's in his own homeland, so supplies is less of an issue. Napoleon has to get supplies all the way from basically France / Prussia, and Austria, right? But they're starting to turn sides. So Vilna, Minsk, and back to Smolensk. I cannot say these names. Vanmas, and then to Moscow. That's his main supply route. He'll have to get supplies. If Kuznetsov sits on his MSR, Napoleon is trapped and cannot go anywhere, and it has to fight a bigger force to break out. So that's not an option. So that's why they're suggesting you need to pull back to Smolensk, because this is a major city and it's not burned, to winter quarters. Now you're going to see he's going to do this way too late. He's doing this way too late, and you're going to see the consequences.
Reluctantly, he accepted that the army would have to move back to Smolensk to find safe winter quarters. Napoleon knew how severe Russian winters could be, but continued to put off his departure, reassured by fine October weather, and hoping that at the last minute there might be a message from Alexander offering peace. It never came. On the 13th of October, the first light snow fell. 5 days later, Kutuzov launched a surprise attack on Murat's advance guard at Vinkovo and defeated it. Napoleon, stung into action, gave the order for the army to leave Moscow the next day.
Now is the moment my campaign begins. Emperor Alexander of Russia, St. Petersburg, October 1812. So again, Napoleon has just ordered the pullout at the 18th of October after Murat, his corps was beaten back by Kuzetsov. So, or Kutuzov, I think I finally got it. So he's leaving on the 19th, 18th/19th. This is a problem. It is about to be November, and light snow had already started happening on the 15th. He has been there way too long, for basically wanting a surrender. That's what he was doing. He was hoping for was a surrender. You could argue that before this time period, usually just taking the capital would people would stop. But again, this is Russia. They play by different rules. They always have. Um, Napoleon, the only ones that were really successful were the Mongols, right? But again, if you actually looked at Russian history, they were willing to sacrifice a hell of a lot to beat the Mongols off. So again, his position was dangerously exposed where he was. Devour him again, pull back to Smolensk, and then you can start getting supplies and hold off, and then you'll need to retake Moscow. I mean, Moscow's already been burned to the ground. I don't see what the point in sitting there really was. I mean, if it was a capital city, or it wasn't even the capital, so let's get that out of the word. St. Petersburg was still the capital. So if the city was still around, you could at least argue that it would be important to hold, but the whole city is basically gone. So, I mean, again, the hindsight is 2020, but even without hindsight, you can see that pulling back earlier would have been a better idea if you're wanting to launch a larger campaign. Because again, he came in Moscow or came into Russia with 600,000 men, so he wanted a quick victory over a long victory.
100,000 men of the Grande Armée left Moscow in a column 10 miles long, with an estimated 40,000 carriages and carts.
So this is an important number: 100,000 men and 400,000 cars. 100,000 men are not going to make it back. I think it's around 10,000 that actually make it back, even less.
There were women and children too, army wives and the vivandières, the women who cooked for the soldiers, as well as some civilians.
This is what we call camp followers. It's been around since. This doesn't go away until really World War One, maybe the Franco-Prussian War. And it's been since all the way from ancient history to basically the Franco-Prussian War, maybe before then. Camp followers, wives, children, cooks, literally anybody that will support the army. Yeah, so wives did travel with soldiers on campaign. That wasn't out of the norm. Even in medieval times, that was part of the norm. So all of those people still have to be fed and then brought, back. And the reason they would take their wives and children with them is, I mean, you're halfway across the world by foot. It's not exactly like you're going to get on a plane and go back and see your loved ones, right? It's going to be months, if not years, before you do that. So bringing them along is, better in a family situation like that. But it's going to lead to massive losses.
Every wagon and pack was stuffed with as much food and loot as possible. As he set off, Sergeant Bourgogne of the Imperial Guard made an inventory of his pack. It contained several pounds of sugar, some rice, some biscuit, half a bottle of liqueur, a woman's Chinese silk dress embroidered in gold and silver, several gold and silver ornaments, amongst them a piece of the cross of Ivan the Great.
So again, that dress of silk with gold embroidery is worth a lot of money.
Besides these, I had my uniform, a woman's large riding cloak, 2 silver pictures in relief, 12 inches long and 8 high, all in the finest workmanship. Also several lockets and a Russian prince's spittoon set with precious stones. I wore over my shirt a yellow silk waistcoat, which I had made myself out of a woman's skirt. Over that, a large cape lined with ermine and a large pouch, hung at my side by a silver cord. This was full of various things, amongst them a crucifix in gold and silver, and a little Chinese porcelain vase.
So again, basically he made his own haversack or sack on top of all of the stuff. So he's carrying a lot of stuff.
There were my firearms, powder flask, and 60 cartridges in the box.
So again, this is a lot of crap to carry, because again, you have to carry all your food and anything you wanted to take with you on campaign, right? If you wanted to take like not a picture, but like a drawing of your family, that had to come with you. All of your cooking stuff had to come with you. It all had to be on your back. So they're taking all the loot they have, it has to be with them, and it has to go all the way back to France, right? Not including any food he's gonna have. So again, he chose loot over food. And that might have worked if Napoleon left in September or very early October, but that is not what is about to happen.
This heavily encumbered army did not yet realize it was in a race against time. The Russians were beginning to move against the flanks of Napoleon's 550-mile deep salient.
So this is as a good point, right? They're heavily loaded because they have all this loot that they took, right, from this campaign. As I said, if Napoleon fell back to Smolensk earlier, you can see that you can see the problem here because Kutuzov could easily cut Napoleon off if he stayed in Moscow too long, right? And that's why he was going to have to leave either way. But if you pull back to Smolensk, you can see that he has a better defensive line. It's still stretched, but is better in and shorter. Okay, this would allow Napoleon to deploy reserves and move and hold this position, and then eventually push next year in the summer slash springtime to basically conquer Russia or take more land. But he's going to have to go down this MSR in winter. It's about to be very bad.
That very day, Wittgenstein's army was driving back Marshal Saint-Cyr's outnumbered force at Polotsk and drawing Victor's 9th Corps west to support them. In the south, Admiral Chichagov's advance had Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps falling back to cover Warsaw.
You said Admiral, so again, don't know if that's accurate, but let's just say it is. An admiral leading army troops. It's technically not out of the. I won't say it's not. I won't say it's normal. I'll just say that it's not unheard of like it is today. Because again, they're part of the aristocracy. So again, it's like how the Russian aristocracy. I get into this long time, but basically, he has a there's a table of ranks in Russia. He has one of the higher ones, so him leading troops. And again, he has to lead naval infantry anyway, so but he's beating them back. So there you go.
The corridor was closing. And then there was the weather. Though Napoleon was confident his army could reach winter quarters in Smolensk in 20 days, well before the more extreme temperatures were due to hit.
20 days, that's what he thought. 20 days from the 19th of October. That put him in November 20th. If October ends, let's just say it ends on the 30th, right? It's 11 days. So he's 9 more days on top of that. So the 10th of December. Or 10th of November, sorry. That's really bad. And as you can see, the average temperature is going down. In September, it's 52 degrees. In October, 42, and then you're going to see November, it goes to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and then 22 in December. So
Napoleon planned to withdraw via Kaluga, through unspoilt country where the army could forage for supplies. But Kutuzov sent General Dokhturov's 6th Corps to block the road at Maloyaroslavets.
And this makes sense for Napoleon, okay? He came up this way, right? And all armies do this. Again, all armies do this until World War I-2. So they're taking supplies from the land and the villages, okay? Even in World War II, they do this. So he wants to go back a new way, which probably has some more food, which is down south, okay, by Kulag, okay? But it's also a lot, I will say it is longer. It's not a direct cut, but you have to go, it takes a bit longer to get this way. But again, I can see the food being an issue, so yeah, doing this for foraging makes sense.
To block the road at Maloyaroslavets. In fierce fighting, Italian troops of Eugene's 4th Corps drove the Russians out of the town. It was a hard-won victory, reminiscent of the fighting at Borodino. Kutuzov now stood between Napoleon and Kaluga. Napoleon now took the unusual step of conferring with his marshals. And after discussing various options, he decided that rather than seek another major battle, they would retreat the way they'd come, along the Smolensk road.
That is, so you're going to see, that is absolutely unusual for Napoleon. Napoleon doesn't really fucking, his marshals or his puppets, let's put it that way. He doesn't usually talk to them. So now he's talking to them, being like, what is the best counsel? Again, very different Napoleon from the one in 1796 compared to 1812. Now, again, they are outnumbered by Kutuzov, okay? And he's sitting in a defensive position on the main road they need to go through. They're going to take enormous casualties, whatever they do, if they try to go through him. If they beat him, and let's just say that they have a 60% chance of beating him, they beat him, they still take casualties that cannot move. These casualties need to be on litters, okay? So it takes like 2 to 4 people to carry one person. They're going to have a lot of casualties. It makes sense, okay? So he's going to try to bypass him or go back the way he came. However, he's going to lose the ability to have food. And now, again, we're at the 24th, and he has to go all the way back to Moscow and then down the other road, okay, on the 24th of October. Again, he said it would take 20 days on the 19th. So you're going to see it's going to get real bad real quick.
Napoleon had hoped to avoid this route, as it meant marching back through country already stripped bare of supplies. The day after the fighting at Maloyaroslavets, Napoleon was nearly captured by a group of Cossacks, and saved only by General Rapp's charge at the head of his escort. After this close shave, Napoleon had a phial of poison made up, which he carried around his neck in case of capture.
And that vial of poison will come back in 1814. I won't spoil what he'll use it for, but it'll come back. Those who were too weak to carry their weapons or knapsacks threw them away, and all looked like a crowd of gypsies. So basically, they were, if the ones that were too weak or too famished couldn't carry their stuff, they threw them away and just tried to get out. He's a private, Jacob Walter, 7th Württemberg Regiment. So you're going to see that this army turns from an army into a mass crowd of people starving and trying to get away.
Napoleon's army set off on its new course.
Now you can see, this is a big overall picture. You can see Kutuzov put himself in a position where he's going to block Napoleon coming down these roads to get new supplies out here, okay? And you can see that Chikharov, I think, is down here in the south. And then you have Wittengest in the north, okay? Now, they can try to push and close this pocket to trap Napoleon here, right? If they go both push to Minsk and cut this off, all these guys are cut off. You can see that it is a very dangerous position that Napoleon is in, okay? And he put himself in this position too. So let's not give him any of the, he didn't know. No, he put himself in this position. So he's going to have to now go on the 26th of October back to Moscow and through Smolensk. And if these guys start pushing, it's going to get real bad real fast.
Napoleon's army set off on its new course, shadowed at a respectful distance by Kutuzov's army to the south. They passed the old battlefield of Borodino, a grisly, unnerving sight where crows pecked at half-buried corpses. Relentless marching quickly began to tire out men and...
I want you to look at this, okay? This might not seem... There are 2 dudes carrying another dude. This, and there's the dudes carrying 2.5 rifles. Again, this army's going to disintegrate very fast into basically just trying to survive with anybody you have.
Relentless marching quickly began to tire out men and horses. A few days later, the temperature fell below freezing. The army's overworked, starving horses died en masse. Discipline began to break down, as some drivers simply dumped the sick and wounded by the roadside to try to ensure their own survival.
And that's just a grim sight, but you have to think about this. It's either you or them at this point. Your cart's going to be too slow, and your horses are already starting to die. The wounded and sick, you either dump them or you die together at this point.
As the French column became increasingly strung out, General Miloradovich, commanding Kutuzov's advance guard, fell on Davout's rear guard outside Vyazma. For a few hours, Davout's first corps was cut off, until Eugene and Ney came to his rescue.
So again, Davout is a rear guard, pulling his miracles if he can.
The battle ended with street fighting in Vyazma, as the French hastily evacuated the burning town. For the soldiers of the Grande Armée, so unaccustomed to retreats and routes, Vyazma was an alarming, demoralizing blow.
The road was strewn with the dead. Our suffering exceeded imagination. General Rapp, Napoleon's aide de camp.
On the 4th of November, it began to snow heavily. The next night, temperatures plummeted to minus 20 degrees centigrade.
Really cold, put it that way. Zero centigrade is 32 Fahrenheit. So for us, it's probably like near zero.
Few men or women had proper winter clothing or access to shelter. Many froze to death overnight.
Now, again, this drawing, I mean, like, you were just trying to huddle together and just stay alive at this point.
Clothing or access to shelter. Many froze to death overnight. The next morning, wagons and guns were abandoned. Many soldiers sought to save themselves, ignoring officers, stealing horses and food, and leaving the column to scour the countryside for supplies.
Right, so they have to abandon their guns. Artillery guns are gone. Discipline is completely failing at this point because they're just trying to... Anybody that has any sense is just leave the column and I'll try to make it out. However, there are Don Cossacks out there, so that is basically a death sentence. If you steal a horse and get on there and you run into a Don Cossack unit, you are dead. So...
Many of these foragers were found by the Cossacks. Some cut down or lanced, others robbed of every possession and left to freeze.
Yeah, Don Cossacks are ruthless people.
In a few cases, they were handed over to peasants, eager for retribution against the foreign invaders who had plundered all they owned. As the army struggled on towards Smolensk through blizzards, Napoleon ordered Eugene's 4th Corps to strike out for Vitebsk, where there were large French supply depots. But Vitebsk had already fallen to the Russians. 4th Corps was too weak to fight its way through, and rejoined the army, minus its artillery and most of its baggage.
And now it is November 9th, and again, what I said could happen if Napoleon wasn't in Smolensk a good 20-30 days ago, is he could have maybe stopped Wittenskin from taking Vitebsk and have his supplies still. But he's not there. He's not even close to Smolensk at this time, and it's already gone. So now his main supply route is gone, which means he's going to go further back than Smolensk. He can't stay in Smolensk anymore, unless there's another supply route coming from this side, but I doubt it.
Minus its artillery and most of its baggage. A colonel who saw 4th Corps at this stage described men without shoes, almost without clothes, exhausted and famished, sitting on their packs, sleeping on their knees, and only rousing themselves out of this stupor to grill slices of horse meat or melt bits of ice. Just 3 weeks after leaving Moscow, a third of the army was dead or captured. About half the rest formed a growing army of stragglers, men without units, prepared to fight only to survive.
Yeah, so he started with 100,000 leaving, down to maybe 60-something thousand, and maybe even half of those can fight, so maybe 30,000 that can actually fight.
Napoleon reached Smolensk on the 9th of November. The first troops into town ransacked the supply depots, leaving nothing for those who followed, including Ney's rearguard, which arrived 6 days later. Napoleon had hoped to make Smolensk his winter base, but the state of the army and lack of supplies meant the retreat had to continue. But the 5 days he spent there gave Kutuzov time to circle ahead and prepare an ambush.
Again, Napoleon is thinking, if he can get supplies, he can stay there. But he's realizing, I'm out of supplies, and my supply corridors are closing. And Kutuzov, to his credit, is putting even more pressure. Instead of sitting around waiting for Napoleon to move, he's going off to cut off his other supply route, which, I mean, there's only one way out.
When the French retreat resumed, he struck 30 miles west of Smolensk at Krasny. In 3 days of desperate fighting through knee-deep snow, Napoleon used his Imperial Guard to hold open the road, as Eugène and Davout's corps fought their way through the ambush with heavy losses.
Now you can see from the Battle of Borodino why he did not use his Imperial Guard. Whether he should or shouldn't have at this point, he didn't. Now he's still using it to hold open a road with basically his only reserve, and this is now spent. Okay, his Imperial Guard was holding this road open, and it's now been spent here. So he validates himself here, but Law didn't do a fully crushing blow in Borodino.
Imperial Guard to hold open the road, as Eugène and Davout's corps fought their way through the ambush with heavy losses. 2 regiments of the Young Guard were ordered to make a sacrificial counterattack to keep the Russians at bay, and were virtually annihilated.
The Young Guard are basically Napoleon's very flexible tactical reserve. He sends them in pretty much all the time. And they are some of the best soldiers he has, actually, because they have a lot of combat experience, and they're usually pulled from literally every single regiment into the best guys are pulled into the Young Guard. And the Young Guard does miracles at times, and this is one of the times. They were told to basically sacrifice themselves in a counterattack to buy time for other guys. So that's what they did.
Kutuzov held back many of his troops and was blamed for not trying to destroy Napoleon's army when he had the chance. It's possible he was concerned at the number of raw conscripts in his own army, also suffering terribly in the freezing conditions.
Yeah, it's not like the Russians are immune to this winter either. They're still bad, but at least they have some supplies. It is their own country. So, and it makes sense. He has a lot of conscripts. He doesn't know what they're really capable of. They may just fold, and then he'll lose his entire army. All the Cossacks and the Russians in the world should not prevent me from rejoining the army. Marshal Ney, the 17th of November at Smolensk. Marshal Ney is a very interesting character. I will say that he is not one of the best marshals. I do not rank him very high in a marshal sense for independent command. However, that being said, he is one of the best tactical commanders Napoleon has when he's overseen, leading his corps by Napoleon. On top of that, he is a badass, and he has unwavering morale, and he inspires every single person around him. He is the heart of the French army, and you're about to see why he is. And this reputation he will have all the way until he is shot. And I think it was... I'll get into it later when we get to the martial breakdowns, probably, but I don't think Ney should have been shot for what he did, but he did betray the king. But again, long story short, I don't think he should have been shot. Stripped of all titles, probably, for betraying the king. But that's neither here nor there. So...
Not every French corps broke through at Krasny. Marshal Ney and his 6,000-strong rearguard arrived on the 18th of November to find the road blocked by 60,000 Russian troops, and no sign of the promised support from Davout's First Corps. Ney's men hurled themselves against the Russian lines with desperate courage, but were mown down. Rejecting several invitations to surrender, Ney led the survivors in a daring night crossing of the Dnieper River.
He has 6,000 men versus 60,000. So this is what I'm talking about. He is the heart of the French army. And he inspires everyone around him.
Then across 45 miles of open country under constant attack from Platov's Cossacks to reach Orsha. By the time Ney rejoined the army, his rearguard was down to just 800 fighting men, leading a column of several thousand stragglers. The army regarded his escape as a miracle, and when Napoleon heard of it, he immediately dubbed Marshal Ney the bravest of the brave.
A title well earned, by the way, and you can see he had 800 guys. He had 6,000 people under his command. By the time he finished, he had 800 guys that could actually fight. The rest were stragglers. And you can see he's out here in front of the men with the men. He is one of the bravest, I think, one of the bravest people in history for what he is able to accomplish here. Not many generals, hell, not many people can accomplish what he did in saving these guys. This is beginning to be very serious. Napoleon to General Clow Court, 23rd of November near Orsha. I think is a little bit more beyond very serious. I think it is at extreme circumstances.
Napoleon had escaped one trap, but now 3 Russian armies were closing in from different directions and outnumbered him nearly 3 to 1. From the east, Kutuzov's main army with 65,000 men. From the north, Wittgenstein with 30,000, steadily driving back Marshal Victor's Ninth Corps. And from the south, Admiral Chichagov's army of Moldavia with 34,000, having detached General Ostensaken with 30,000 to prevent Schwarzenberg's Austrians and Reynier's Saxon Corps marching to Napoleon's aid. Napoleon was heading for Minsk, a major French supply base with vast stores of the food, clothing, shoes and ammunition that his army so desperately needed.
So you can see that he's about to be pincered from 2 sides, and he's being pushed on a third. He's not going to make it to Minsk. Chikhayev is too close, and there is not enough guys there to defend it or hold it off. So he's going to have to go all the way to Poland or the Duchy of Warsaw at this time to get out of here. And you can see this trap is closing very, very fast on him.
But on the 21st of November, disastrous news arrived. Minsk had fallen to Chichagov. He'd then marched on Borisov, driven out the Polish garrison, and captured its bridge over the Berezina River. By rights, the Berezina ought to have frozen solid by now, so Napoleon could have crossed anywhere. But a sudden thaw had turned the river into a torrent of ice and freezing water.
You fall into that, you are dead. Even if you get out of it, there is no fire to warm you up. There's nothing. You basically will die. This is a nightmare scenario now. And we've gone from a very bad scenario that's almost unwinnable to a nightmare scenario. Not only has his main supplies been cut off, he is now completely cut off with all of his guys now. He is cut off on 3 sides with a river that he can't cross on foot because it's not iced. This is a nightmare scenario that he's going to have to deal with, and it's going to require some quite daring feats to pull it off.
Napoleon was at least joined by the hard-fighting Marshal Oudinot and his Second Corps, which hadn't suffered as badly as the main column on its retreat from Polotsk.
And that's what I'm saying. These guys in the rear that have been here are still a lot more combat effective than the Grand Armée that's under Napoleon's command are, because they were held back and were defending the sides of the massive movement of troops that Napoleon went to Moscow with.
Oudinot launched an immediate counterattack on Borisov and retook the town, but couldn't stop the Russians burning the bridge. With no other bridge for miles in either direction, it seemed Napoleon's exhausted army was finally doomed. But there was one sliver of hope. Polish cavalry had found a ford across the river near the village of Studienka. Napoleon issued a flurry of orders. Second Corps was to fake preparations for a river crossing south of Borisov. Victor's Ninth Corps, arriving from the north, was to form a rear guard east of Studienka to hold the Russians at bay, while engineers worked as quickly as possible to build pontoon bridges across the river and win Napoleon's army a fighting chance of escape.
Now, this is best hope he's got. Thank God for the Polish cavalry. They were able to find a ford. But the ford is, again, you just can't immediately cross it. You need engineers to build pontoon bridges. Those engineers are going to fucking freeze in the water. Because, fun fact, it's not like you can just put wood on water and it's like, oh, it's very good. No, you got to get in the water and you got to hammer stuff in. They're freezing. And he's going to put Ninth Corps to hold off this perimeter. And there's a very good idea. He's going to tell Second Corps to prepare a fake crossing here between Chukayev if he can fool Chukayev, Chichagov, sorry. He can fool Chichagov and to deploy his guys here, he might be able to punch through with his guys on the fort and get out. But his rear guards are going to have to do their damnedest to hold this position, or it's over. Our situation is unparalleled. If Napoleon extricates himself today, he must have the devil in him. Marshal Ney to General Raps was aide de camp. Napoleon's aide de camp, the 28th of November. Yeah, the Breeze River. It's gonna be a hell of a thing if he pulls it off.
On the afternoon of the 25th of November, General Eblay's Dutch engineers began building two 300-foot pontoon bridges across the Berezina River. They worked day and night, sometimes chest-deep in freezing water, and completed both bridges in less than 24 hours.
That's what I'm talking about. Dutch engineers too, and these guys got to get in that freezing water to build and save everyone else basically.
Few of the engineers survived the ordeal.
And again, as I said, if you fall in that water, you have a very good chance of dying, if not immediately dying. So these guys died to get this bridge up so that the rest of their guys could probably get out and live.
Chichagov had been totally fooled by the diversion south of Borisov and was moving his troops south to face it, allowing Napoleon's army to begin crossing its rickety bridges virtually unopposed.
Now that he's across, he has to defend this position, because Chichagayev is not stupid. Once he figures out that this is not the crossing and he's going to go up here, he's going to find a crossing, he's going to do all of his efforts, he's going to put everything in here he possibly can to stop this the crossing of the bridge from these other units. And once they figure out where he's crossing, they're going to start slamming as many units into Napoleon as possible. It's going to be very bad.
Oudinot's Second Corps led the way to secure a bridgehead, followed the next day by the remnants of the main army. Priority was given to formed troops, still able to fight. For the time being, the army's vast crowd of stragglers remained on the far bank.
And that makes sense to get the formed troops across, because they need to hold the position and fight across. But look at this. Look at this site. This is... I wouldn't be surprised if this is a very accurate representation of... I mean, this is about as good of a picture as you're going to get. But yeah, just stragglers. Hundreds of thousands of... tens of thousands of stragglers trying to get over two bridges. Yeah, it's going to be a nightmare.
By the time Chichagov realized his mistake and began moving north, Napoleon had troops in place to defend the crossing. On the east bank, General Partonneux's 12th Division, 4,000 relatively fresh troops from Victor's 9th Corps, formed the rearguard.
You do not want to be put on rear guard, dude. I don't care. You know, on this position, look, you are about to be cut off completely from. There's 4,000 of you. They might not make it. And they're basically the rear guard is to delay Patlov here, but...
As Platov's Cossacks approached from the east, the vanguard of Kutuzov's main army, Partonneux tried to rejoin 9th Corps. But caught in a swirling blizzard, with visibility down to 50 meters, he marched straight into Wittgenstein's army. His entire division was killed or captured.
That's what I'm saying. Rear guard is very dangerous, and he tried to get back to 9th Corps, but 4,000 men gone like that.
The next morning, Chichagov and Wittgenstein launched coordinated attacks on both sides of the river. There was desperate fighting on the west bank, where Marshal Oudinot was, yet again, seriously wounded, but his Swiss infantry held the line, until General Doumerc's cuirassiers, the army's last heavy cavalry, charged and routed the Russians.
His last heavy cavalry in the entire army. Every other cavalryman is every other horse is probably dead at this point. So,
At great cost, Polish and German troops of Victor's rearguard held off the Russians until dark, then pulled back across the bridges.
And you can see that this army is a multi-ethnic army, multicultural, multi-nation. Prussians and Polish, if I'm reading that correctly.
At great cost, Polish and German troops of Victor's rearguard held off the Russians until dark.
Polish and Germans, can you imagine working together to hold off the Russians? Yeah.
Then pulled back across the bridges. For 2 nights, officers had been trying to get the vast camp of stragglers to cross the bridges when they weren't being used. But with temperatures reaching -30 centigrade, they'd preferred to stay put, huddled around their fires.
And that makes, okay. So the officers were trying to get them across, okay, when the bridges weren't in use, which basically means that once the main units were across, the ones that could still fight at this point, once they were across, the bridge was empty, okay? Then they were trying to get the stragglers, which are basically, I mean, they're combat ineffective. They're basically, they can't do anything. Trying to get them across, okay? But they're still French and multi-ethnic army. Basically, anybody that's still on that side that's hunkered down, that can't fight, but they can get them across. But they don't want to leave because it is, below freezing, and there's a fire, and you kind of don't want to move. However, me, and probably you, depends, again, we're not in this situation. Get your ass across the bridge, because even if you're going to be freezing for a while, if you are on this side of the bridge and you have fire versus this side of the bridge, you have a lot higher chance of surviving the onslaught that's about to start happening than on this side. Because if everyone starts rushing across this bridge, it's over. You need to get, even if you don't have fire on this side, you're like, at least I'm across and I can huddle together with a dead horse or some people at this point. I mean, yeah. So they try to get them across, but they need to pull out. This army these stragglers are probably going to get left behind because they need to pull out. They can't stop here. They still need to keep going west, and it's the 28th of November, so we're about to get to December. So these stragglers are not about to be good.
At dawn on the 29th, with the army leaving and the Russians approaching, thousands of stragglers surged in panic towards the bridges. Dozens were crushed underfoot. Others fell or were pushed into the water, or tried to swim, which was certain death. When French engineers burned the bridges at 9 a.m, thousands were cut off and left to the mercy of the advancing Cossacks. Some became prisoners. Others were simply put out of their misery.
Yeah, they're Don Cossacks. Again, they have to burn the bridges. They don't have a choice here. You got to burn the bridges to stop the Russians. If the Russians get across on your flank, it's over. Whatever you try to accomplish here, it's going to be for naught. They got to burn the bridges. It's a sad fact, but they got to leave those guys behind. And the Don Cossacks, they said some were captured. A lot were just killed outright. They're Don Cossacks, I mean.
Of the advancing Cossacks. Some became prisoners. Others were simply put out of their misery.
What appalling misery, what a multitude have perished in this retreat. Captain Franz Roeder, lifeguard of the Grand Duke of Hesse. So lifeguard basically means his bodyguard. That's what lifeguard means, Fun fact. Lifeguard, protecting your life. And lifeguards are very highly trained individuals, so.
Since the retreat began 43 days earlier, the Grande Armée had marched nearly 500 miles, under constant attack, starved, exhausted, and for the last 23 days, in lethal sub-zero temperatures, without proper clothing or shelter.
And it was supposed to take 20 days to get to Smolensk by Napoleon, and now day 43. Yeah, the winter, everything.
In that time, the fighting strength of the Grande Armée had been reduced from around 124,000 men to 20,000.
I don't want to think about the percentage. That's that's around 15%.
As many stragglers still following the army. As the retreat continued to Vilna, the weather turned even worse, the temperatures falling to minus 37 degrees centigrade.
God, Dad, oh.
The Russian armies, at least
Yeah, minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, yeah.
now held back, leaving the winter, Cossacks and Russian peasants to finish off the invaders. On the 5th of December, Napoleon left the army, travelling incognito across Europe at breakneck speed, and reaching Paris in just 13 days.
That's an impressive feat, actually. Not the fact that he banished his men. He does that, I won't say quite often. He's done it before. He's done it in Egypt. He's done it but 13 days to get from Vilna back to Paris is very impressive. Those carriages were going very fast with those horses.
Naturally, English satirists capitalized on Napoleon seeming to abandon his defeated
Tell them we left the army in excellent quarters, provisions, plenty of provisions, we travel in grand style.
army. And many soldiers did regard it as an act of betrayal. But his generals supported his decision to leave. There'd already been one attempted coup against Napoleon in Paris, and there was much work to be done to rebuild the army and reassure France's allies. On the 9th of December, 51 days after the retreat began, around...
I can see both sides, obviously. Napoleon's going to get, this is a problem with an empire that you put together and don't have a lot of trusted people and, blah, 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 blah. This is what happens. You have coups and stuff. When you overtake a government by military force. So I can see both sides. Napoleon needs to get back to reassure the country, and it's probably the right decision. His generals also agree that is the right decision, and I agree with them. It's definitely the right decision. Not going to make the men feel great when their commander just ups and leaves them. So
around 20,000 ragged survivors of the Grande Armée began crossing the Niemen River back into friendly Polish territory. According to legend, Marshal Ney was the last man across.
You can see he's a true leader of men. So. 20,000. They started with 124,000. 20,000 made it. That's barely any. Second and third corps no more than a memory. The latter numbers only 60 men. Corps usually 10,000, 20,000 people, 30,000 people. 60 men.
Napoleon's invasion of Russia had proved to be one of the greatest military disasters in history. He had made fatal miscalculations about geography, logistics, and above all, Russia's political and strategic response to his invasion. These blunders cost his empire around 500,000 men, as well as 250,000 horses and 1,000 cannon.
So his invasion force around 600,000, so it's about 570,000. 375,000 are dead. You add another 100,000 on top of that are captured. There's a 475,000. Only 95,000 people returned.
Another way, of every 12 men who marched into Russia with the Grande Armée, one was killed in action or died of wounds. 2 were taken prisoner, one of whom died in captivity. 7 died from disease or the effects of climate. Just 2 returned alive.
What do you think about that? Out of 12 people, 2 come back. 1 actually died in battle. 2 were prisoners of war. 1 dies. 7 were killed out by the disease and climate. That's natural for all armies. But it's extremely... you're marching in the goddamn winter. So, yeah, it's going to make the casualties come up. But this is irreplaceable loss. I cannot tell you that this is it. After 1812, it's over. Whatever Napoleon does is over. He cannot rebuild an army like this. All the experienced guys are dead or wounded or killed outright. yeah, this is basic. I mean, it's gonna be a slow death. But I mean,
Contrary to myth, many more soldiers had died in the summer advance from heat, typhus and dysentery than were lost in the winter retreat. Russian military casualties were estimated at 150,000.
it's interesting, right? You wouldn't think about the disease being that bad during the summer and stuff, but it definitely was. But that ending blow with the winter, I mean,
Russian military casualties were estimated at 150,000, and a huge but unknown number of civilian deaths. The Russian campaign was a catastrophe for Napoleon. Not just in lost troops and resources, but in damage to prestige and reputation. That winter, all his enemies sensed weakness and prepared to join forces against him. But the Emperor wasn't going down without a fight.
so before that, I would want you to think about Spain is going on this entire time. There were 570,000 men went into Russia, 95,000 came out. All that experience, everything they had, all their training, all gone. Okay, now he's also full fighting in Spain, and he's able to start fighting everyone else without the army that he had. As his national prestige is gone, not alone, not just the men, all the material, everything is gone. So, as I said, this is going to be a slow death, but it's coming.
To join forces against him. But the Emperor wasn't going down without a fight. Back in Paris, he admitted to his ministers, "Fortune has dazzled me, gentlemen. I've let it lead me astray. Instead of following my plan, I went to Moscow. I thought I'd make peace there. I stayed too long. I've made a grave mistake, but I'll have the means to repair it."
At least he admits his mistake, but his means to repair it, I don't know. So that's going to be the end of the video there.
Thank you to all the Patreon supporters who make this series possible.
So yeah, that's the end of the video there. So some closing thoughts. Yeah, Napoleon is about to start fighting basically the entire coalition in 1812, 1813, 1814. And I will say his 1814 campaign, his defense of France, which we will get to, is one of his master strokes in him defending his homeland and the French homeland. But after Russia, I mean, it's over. I don't know what to tell you guys. It's he's going to be trying. He's going to be doing a lot of tactical brilliances still, and defeating his enemies. But that army that went into Russia, that was it. That was his biggest card he could have played, and they're all gone basically. So hope you guys like my reaction to that. Hope you learned something. Hope this video is not over an hour and a half long. So if it's an hour, otherwise, subscribe if you like this stuff. The playlist will keep going, which should be up there, I think. If you want to go watch some older videos on those. So other than that, please leave a like, and I'll see you people later.